Well, of course, we did want to bring you coverage of one of the most inflammatory things Hillary Clinton has maybe ever said. That's a long list, but let's take a listen to her. One thing she said that caught a lot of people's attention, and rightfully so, on CNN last week.
Those MAGA extremists take their marching orders from Donald Trump, who has no credibility left by any measure. He's only in it for himself. He's now defending himself in civil actions and criminal actions. And when do they break with him? Because at some point, maybe there needs to be a formal deprogramming of the cult members, but something needs to happen.
Look at Christine Amanpour just kind of laughing at that. Of course, somewhat chilling coming from the former Secretary of State. It's one thing if someone says it on a podcast. It's another thing when it's coming, again, from the former Secretary of State and First Lady. It carries a whole lot more weight in that case. And such an interesting glimpse into the mind of America's most powerful people. Ryan, I think it's really important to recognize that privately she would probably say the same thing about a whole lot of Bernie Sanders supporters, and that is where it's chilling, like extremely chilling. We're seeing some laws already in the UK as it relates to protests around what's happening in Israel and Palestine about limiting potential speech. This is, government efforts to start limiting speech in this kind of high-tech social media digital world. People are getting way more brazen about saying things exactly like what Hillary Clinton just said.
Somebody described her, I think, accurately as kind of the raw id of a certain kind of liberal Democrat at this point.
A powerful one.
Yeah, and she's just, the things that she says privately with her friends who nod along, she now just says them in interviews with people who then also nod along.
A journalist who's laughing at it.
It's kind of funny.
She wasn't laughing because it was funny.
She's also not gonna, she doesn't actually have any power anymore. But it's very interesting to see, where her mind is or has gone. My first thought, from the perspective of Democrats who are watching this and being like, can you? Like, so many normie Democrats were like, can you please stop?
Right.
Like, she has lost so many people who are like, please stop. My first thought was about Herbert Hoover, who absolutely insisted on showing up at every single Republican National Convention for the rest of his very long life.
Right.
Like, he lived into like the 70s or something.
He wanted to watch.
People can look. No, he wanted to speak. And they're like, can you not speak? Maybe. You're Herbert Hoover. You're killing us, man.
Right.
Like, most qualified, and there's an irony there. Let's assume that Hillary Clinton was elected president. Had she been, the three most qualified, like on paper, presidents in history would be her, James Buchanan, and Herbert Hoover.
Right.
And Herbert Hoover and James Buchanan went down as the two worst presidents, you've got to say, in our history. And the Republicans every 4 years had to watch this guy get up on TV and address the American public and remind the American public that the Republican Party was the party of Herbert Hoover, as they were trying to shake him off and and battle this kind of democratic hegemony that grew up from the Great Depression that Herbert Hoover mishandled so badly. And so here Hillary Clinton for the rest of our lives is just going to be rolling out interviews saying increasingly unhinged things.
I had to look up a fact because I thought Herbert Hoover at one point had to cede a spot to Clare Boothe Luce, and I looked it up. This is New York Times from 1944 at the RNC. I think I have to go back into the Luce biography, but I think for some reason she had to steal the spotlight for him, and he was glad to give it up to her.
I don't know how glad he was.
So the story goes.
Right, they're begging him. Look, really, come on, we can finally come on. FDR can barely speak anymore.
It's 1944, Herbert.
We can beat this guy this time. But no, you can't. You cannot beat him.
And this is the New York Times frames it as to hand over the torch of the Republican Party to, quote, a new generation. So Hillary Clinton maybe should recognize that, quote, a new generation might take her place.
She's their Hoover. She's not going anywhere.
What would be frightening, speaking of the generational problem here for Democrats, we can put this next element up on the screen. This is my boss, Molly Hemingway, over at the Federalist, commenting on what Michael Hayden said about Senator Tommy Tuberville, who a lot of Democrats are deeply upset with for blocking the confirmations of people in the military, military nominees, over the Pentagon's policy to pay for some of its staffers to get abortions in the light of the Dobbs decision. This has been going on for a year. Tuberville's hold, I think, goes back to March. Somali said, former CIA Director Michael Hayden calls for the assassination of Senator Tuberville because the senator is performing, in Molly's take, she's a conservative, desperately needed oversight of the U.S. military. Now, Hayden responds to some of the conservative backlash. This is the next element. And says, basically, I was surprised to wake up this morning and discover that many MAGA nuts had lost their minds over my suggestion that, quote, Coach Tuberville not be considered a member of the human race. I stand by that view. I'm wishing you all a nice day, even the intransient Tommy Tuberville. Again, Ryan, this is something that if someone said on a podcast, it's like, whatever. The former CIA director, a completely different story. And I think it just gets to the conversation we're having about how some of these, like, the bitterness of both former, Liz Cheney, Hillary Clinton, Michael Hayden, this kind of past generation of neoconservative, neoliberal American leaders is leading itself to this brazenness in prior years. I mean, people would be like, "What are you doing, man?"
There are a lot of raw ids running around out there.
Right. Rampant raw
just letting their id flag fly on X.com.
Yeah, I mean, maybe it's a Twitter thing. Maybe that's all. Maybe but for Twitter. Except Hillary Clinton was talking to Christiane Amanpour, right? So not but for Twitter. And Michael Hayden, there's a great Columbia Journalism Review piece back in 2017 that is like castigating the media for taking anything he says seriously when you look at his history of lying about torture, Abu Ghraib, his history of lying about Edward Snowden and the NSA. I mean, the guy is an absolute joke that somehow still gets published in places like USA Today and seen on cable news. But again, former CIA director saying that about a sitting senator, Hillary Clinton saying that about millions of Americans. Normal times. Hey, if you liked that video, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe to Breaking Points.
If you want to see the rest of Counterpoints, go to breakingpoints.com to become a premium member and get the full uncut show every morning in your inbox and on Spotify.
Help us build independent news and get the full show every morning at breakingpoints.com.